One of the major things I think to start thinking about this exercise is not to necessarily compare it with previous ones which have happened with the United States and France last year. I think that would be to draw a false equivalence. One of the major factors we always have to bear in mind when thinking about what is happening with South Africa's diplomacy is that Russia is a belligerent state. It is currently engaged in an international armed conflict. The previous exercises with France and the United States were not held under those kind of conditions. This is a situation which, as you say, for a year now, has been capturing the world's attention and has resulted in several things. A very severe shipping sanction on Russia, for instance, a whole range of signals being sent by the rest of the world that to be seen as participating in this kind of exercise sends the wrong signal about what South Africa's policy intentions are. It actually sends very confusing messages, especially given the fact that previously it has been very prepared and has benefited from exercises with a whole range of countries, Germany, for instance, as well, given we have German-built frigates and submarines, is a very essential partner as well. So these exercises, while an essential part of how we are able to maintain our Navy and indeed have a very important diplomatic role in this case, given for the first time, basically, South Africa is very heavily involved with a state at war, which has broken the UN Charter on many international norms, really does set an uncomfortable precedent for the future.
So, Tim, what I'm trying to understand, you say we need to take into account that these exercises occur against the backdrop of one of these countries having attacked another. All three countries say the exercises are to protect maritime economic activities. Now, I'm just wondering, are you saying that South Africa, our country, is lying to us when they say they are for these particular exact intents? And does the fact that Russia has attacked the Ukraine make us complicit in what was going on in the Ukraine? Is that what you're saying?
Not what I'm saying, but those are two very important questions or ways of looking at it, which we have to consider. The two questions being, one, is South Africa's maritime security ability improved as a result of these exercises? And unfortunately, the answer is not really, not compared to the exercises we enjoy as has been mentioned with many other countries over the last, since 1994, basically. The Navy has played an incredible role as a what's sometimes called a grey diplomat, an uncelebrated role in linking up South Africa with various countries. So that's been a fascinating and very important part of what's been going on. But the second question is Russia's ability to prosecute its war against Ukraine improved or enhanced somewhat by exercising with South Africa? It's a difficult question to answer because it's not hugely improved. As you've mentioned, the Zircon missile, there's been a lot of controversy over whether that might be tested. It's a new weapon which would really, really change the kind of tactical and even operational mindsets of many people around the world if it were to be a successful weapon. But is Russia's ability to prosecute its war improved slightly? Yes, it is, unfortunately. The sailors on board, the lessons that are learned, those can be taken back to the conflict in some way. The ship itself may not be able to enter into the Black Sea and be in the kind of area of operations. But certainly some of the lessons learned, the capacities, which are the result of this, because South Africa, as we ourselves, we're looking to improve our capacity to sail our ships, to interact with other navies. And those do play a part.
I need to say it's important also to underscore the fact that these drills, these exercises take place against the backdrop of Armed Forces Week. They have been involved in various exercises, drills themselves, South Africa on their own. So I'm just wondering, what's different from the drills that are being done now with Russia, China, that South Africa has done in the past with the United States, Germany, all the other countries that you've mentioned? What's different? What's involved in the drills?
Well, naval exercises generally are undertaken to improve the skills of the navies. That's one given. but mostly they're designed actually to send signals. Naval exercises, for instance, in South Korea with the United States and South Korea are undertaken if they feel threatened by North Korea. North Korea itself obviously responds in similar ways as well. So most countries around the world are looking at this going, when they organize naval exercises, they want to, one, improve their alliances and capabilities, but they also want to send clear signals to the maybe adversaries or to their own populations that these are our partners. This is what we intend to do with our navies in the future. And as I say, the whole kind of context of this conflict is, for instance, Russia. Many viewers might recall the Lady R docking in Simonstown in December. Now, this raised a lot of red flags, as it were, because it switched off its automatic identification system. It was not very transparent about why it was there, what it was doing. It basically broke a lot of the ideas of what it means to be operating safely at sea. What we're increasingly seeing is Russian ships doing that more and more often, not necessarily sailing around the Cape, but that could be a thing in the future. We could have more and more Russian ships, for instance, sailing around the Cape of Good Hope with their signals turned off to avoid or evade some kind of scrutiny because of the sanctions regime. Now, because of that, and because that really matters to a lot of businesses as well as policy makers in countries all around the world, it raises questions about what is South Africa intending to do in the future? Is it intending to make a strong stance against this kind of behavior at sea where ships turn off their signals? Because if there's a crash, for instance, or a ship sinks around the Cape, as has happened many, many times over the centuries, and if that ship can't be traced properly, or if there's no liability or struggles over that, like we saw in the Casio, which sunk in Mauritius a couple of years ago, then that actually damages our maritime interests. Our interests are about having transparency, about having a clear image of what's going around our coast, one of the
before we run out of time
in the world.
I need to ask this question, because this is a question that our international relations minister asked, that why, for instance, these operations are intended to promote defense and security, and you can't speak about that outside of sovereignty of a nation. You say for many of them it's to flex their muscles, to show their capabilities to whatever potential adversaries. I'd imagine that South Africa would also want to some extent, show its military might, that should it come under attack, that it is capable of protecting its people. The International Relations and Cooperations Minister has asked why South Africa being seen from a different prism when it does that exercise with Russia, China, whereas with other Western nations, it's not seen like that. So you're saying there's a lot of questions that are abound, and I understand that, and it's important to ask those questions, to understand that, but are they definite to such an extent that South Africa must be criticized for having a relationship with one and not the other? Because it has said it's taken a non-aligned stance on this.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, because there's a distinction to be drawn between navies and maritime. Now, maritime could mean your coast guard, your police operating at sea, whereas navies are very strictly a war-fighting ability, which is often used for things like police work at sea, coast guard, and prevention of illegal fishing. Illegal fishing, which, say, takes place often without signals of ships being turned on. We're looking at an exercise now with two countries with which we do not share a common doctrine in terms of the training of our navies over the last couple of decades, the kind of equipment we use as well. It takes a long time to gain that kind of trust and confidence and ability to act with each other. Whereas what we've been doing in South Africa over the last 20 to 30 years is acting with many other navies with whom we have a similar doctrine, equipment, training. And what it seems to be is we're moving away from that now towards partnering increasingly with two countries with which we don't have that kind of easily mergeable ability. What we're looking at all around the African continent is an increase in things like illegal fishing, is an increase in things like smuggling or human trafficking. And those things affect our neighboring countries as much as ourselves. And because they're a common problem, the solutions often have to be very common as well. And we have very few naval ships around Africa if we combine them all together. Right. We have to do the best we can with what we have. And therefore, we have to look at the kind of things that we can work with our neighbors rather than countries which are completely removed from the situation, which nevertheless have interest in the region, but are so distinct in terms of the way they operate compared to actually the fact that we've been working with countries like France, Germany, the United States, and neighboring countries within the SADC region for several decades. But we seem now to be moving away from that. And that's a very confusing message which has been broadcast.
Okay.